So we have already answered some questions. What if I have to teach vocabulary? What considerations do I need to bear in mind? We have also discussed what is it that we need to consider if what we have to teach is grammar. So the time has come for us to answer the question, what is it that I need to remember if what I need to work on with my students remotely happens to be reading? When it comes to reading comprehension, there is a common mistake to make, which is just to send the text with a couple of reading comprehension activities. We need to remember that usually in class, when we work with reading, there are things that we do when we are with our students. There is an instance that we call pre-reading, in which we do certain things, but this time our students will not have the opportunity to work with us in that pre-reading stage. So this is again when I tell you that the remote tasks that we have to send our students will have to have characteristics of a self-study guide, in the sense that we will have to include pre-reading tasks. There are certain things that need to happen in a pre-reading moment. There are certain reading strategies that need to take place in that pre-reading moment, and we should not take those reading strategies for granted. So it's really, really very important that we include that in the remote tasks. So I'm talking about including in the remote tasks a pre-reading moment in which we have to get students to grasp the main idea of the text. We need to get students to pay attention to paratext features such as the title of the text or the pictures with a text. We have to explicitly teach them pre-reading strategies such as skimming or scanning. We're going to see those in detail in subsequent modules. We need to make them connect personally with the topic of the text. It's really very important, so that before they actually read the whole text, they already have an idea of what the text might be about. And of course, once they do read the text, there is this post-reading instance in which students are expected to read for detail. But at the same time, it's not only that they have to do. They must also be given the opportunity to respond personally to what they have read. And that is what we call the critical aspect of reading, something which, of course, we are going to see in depth in the coming modules. So let me show you an example. And of course, as I told you before, we are going to see things in depth as we move on. But for this task, for these remote tasks, students would read a text about J.K. Rowling, who happens to be the author of Harry Potter. Before, actually, students read the text, what kind of pre-reading tasks did I engage them in to actually get them to preview the text and connect personally to the text? So if you pay attention, it says before we practice scanning, there is explicit naming of the reading strategy. Students will practice skimming. Look at the following photograph and complete the chart. Something that I will suggest you include in these remote tasks that you will be sending your students is using graphic organizers to make thinking visible. This is the type of task that I really believe is going to give you evidence of how students think and how students solve the different tasks. So here, for example, just by looking at one of the photographs that goes together with the text, students will have to try to activate prior knowledge, and they have to complete what they know about the person in this photograph. So that's how we activate the prior knowledge. What they want to know, because maybe they don't know who she is, they will be making some inferences. Maybe I've never seen her before, but she's holding a Harry Potter book, so maybe she's the author. They will be making inferences. And then there is a third column called What I Have Learned, which is for students to complete after they have read the text. So they are previewing, they are using skimming for this. And then it says, let's give scanning a try. You have to try to find the answer to these questions in not more than 2 minutes, because we need to remember that skimming and scanning are quick reading strategies. So students will have to find the answer to these questions without actually reading the whole text. So they've got questions such as, when was she born? Where was she born? What happened in 1990? Who is Jorge Arantes? What happened in 1993? What was her big idea? Students need to practice scanning for this. Now, if you pay attention to the importance of all this, is that before actually students read the text, they can already begin to put the pieces together. They have already activated prior knowledge by looking at the photograph that comes together with the text. And they have already extracted some explicit information from the text. Then there is a third task that asks the students to look at the answers to these two previous tasks. And without reading the text, they have to try to answer the following question, which is, what is the text about? So they are given possible answers to that. It is about how J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter. It is about how J.K. Rowling came up with ideas for Harry Potter. It is about how J.K. Rowling's life before she became one of the world's famous writers, what her life was before she became famous. And it is about J.K. Rowling's daughter. So just by quickly skimming and by quickly scanning, students have to try to work out what the text might be about. All this question of making predictions and making anticipations, previewing a text, and quickly scanning are part of the very useful skills that students will need for international exams and for reading in general. Usually, I would always say that this has to be explicitly taught in class. But what if that doesn't happen? And such is the case. So if we're going to read with the students remotely, if they will be given things to read remotely, we need to make sure that we also scaffold that reading practice with the explicit teaching of reading strategies. The next question to ask is, what if it is writing? What if it is writing? What do we need to consider? Again, if the task that we will give students remotely involves writing, we need to remember absolutely that writing is a productive skill. We cannot just send them something to write, because students will be puzzled. And remember, one of the characteristics of effective homework is that we don't want students to be puzzled. So just as we have a pre-reading moment in reading, we also have a pre-writing moment. And this pre-writing moment has a lot of things that we need to consider as educators. In the first place, we need to consider if students are familiar with the genre that we are expecting them to write. If we want them to write a letter, are they familiar with what a letter is? What kind of letter is it? Is it formal? Is it informal? Will they be expected to write an essay? Will they be expected to write an animal riddle? Whatever it is that they will be expected to write, they need to have read it first. They need to have read several examples of that genre. That's why in subsequent modules we will be talking about how important it is that reading and writing are connected. Writing in response to reading, but we are going to go back to that later on. If they are expected to write a letter or an essay or a poem or even a paragraph, they need what we call genre modeling. That is to say, they need to know how to write it. This is what in several methodologies they talk about author's techniques or the author's workshop. Again, normally I would advise that you do this in class, face-to-face with your students. But what if we are all in lockdown? I guess we need to scaffold their writing practice remotely. So we have to include in that remote task guide or handout that we provide them with, we need to include genre modeling, and we need to scaffold as much as possible with typical useful expressions for that genre, and of course with vocabulary that they will be expected to use. And there is nothing that we have to take for granted. Before students can write an essay, they need to know how to write a paragraph. And before they write paragraphs, they need to be efficient writers of sentences. There has to be some logical order here. So it's really very important that we take nothing for granted and that we help as much as we can so that when the time comes for them to write, they are fully equipped to do so. So I'm going to show you now another example. Remember that we will be exploring many more. But for example, students will be expected to write a whole composition, a whole essay. But before they do, we are not taking for granted that they know how to write an effective paragraph. So students will present it with this scaffolding I was mentioning before, how we organize, how we structure a paragraph. So we structure a paragraph starting with a topic sentence that tells the reader what the paragraph is going to be about, supporting sentences that will add more details, but they are still all connected to the topic sentence. And of course, there is an ending sentence, a closing sentence, which of course indicates somehow to the reader that that paragraph is over and that we will probably move on to something else. It's really very good to make this quite visual. That's why I usually use colors, striking colors, and I usually use a lot of examples. So we move from the structure to examples. So there is a paragraph there in very simple language. The beach is my favorite place to visit. Topic sentence. As a reader, I already know that that paragraph is going to be about why you love the beach so much. So the supporting sentences go, I love to swim and play in the water. My brother and I build big sand castles. Sometimes we see crabs hurrying across the sand. Those are the reasons why the beach is my favorite place. Closing sentence, the beach has so many fun things to do. We always teach students that the closing sentence is somehow connected to the topic sentence. And then one of the things that I'm going to insist on when you give students remote writing tasks is that you provide students with the opportunity to experience planning their writing.